So, welcome everyone to AI in construction. So, this month, this week, actually, we're going to talk about a really interesting thing that I'm seeing in the market. So, I talk to folks, in various stages, and contractors and so on. And there's sort of I mean, we're using the word chasm. I thought I just like that because obviously from crossing the chasm. But this idea that there's sort of casual use, and then there's where we're seeing people get real value from it. And a good friend of mine and someone I've done a lot of work with, Stephen Poppy, and I were talking a couple months ago or 6 weeks ago, and he used this term that he felt like he'd crossed a chasm where the use and the value of AI had really made a difference. So today we're going to dig into that a little bit. And that's sort of what I mean by chasm is this sort of difference between people using it, almost like Google, where you're asking a question and that's it, to actually integrating it in how you do business and how you kind of live your life. And there's a kind of a difference, and it's kind of interesting. I couldn't help myself. As soon as I thought of this, I was like, bro, do you even prompt? So I actually prompted this, and ChatGPT was able to make this isn't me. This isn't how I look yet, although we're working hard. Um, you know, the idea here is that a lot of people are aware of this toolkit, this advancing prompts, or using ChatGPT to write prompts. A lot of the stuff that I've talked about, and it's easy to come to a webinar and hear me talk about this. But the magic really happens when people kind of make that leap from one level to another, really using AI to make your life better. Um, and that's what we want to talk about today. And again, I've invited Stephen to talk to me. So kind of this real use of AI in construction. What I'm finding, sorry, Luciana, can you mute, please? Thank you. Right. So real use of AI in construction, what I'm finding more and more, and that's where the magic of today kind of, I think, comes, is that what I'm finding is that for all the fact that we've got, these big agents from the open AIs and from Google and from other companies, I'm seeing more and more folks on the contractor level that are actually kind of using it to make the software they use right now just a little bit better so that it really fits what they want. Or maybe they're automating some little thing, or maybe they're helping to prep for things. But the point is, a lot of the value in AI as it stands now, in terms of the products that are out there and just where people are comfortable, often is in little things and not so little things, but these are things that are specific to you, not something that a startup came up with or that you've kind of seen someone speak about. Generally, it's the personalization and the saying, hey, these are the things that I do, how can this help? So when you take the toolkit I talked about, the value is really investing the time in trying, learning more about it and trying it out so that you can do things that really help what you do, as opposed to, as I say, some of these bigger general things that you hear about. So with that, I'm going to introduce Stephen. So as I mentioned a moment ago, Stephen and I have known each other for 4 years now. Yes, Stephen, it's been that long. He's a pretty recognized construction tech guru. He's an advisor at a couple of startups, mine being one of them. He's a senior leader at Via Technic on the sales side, but he's a little bit, at least as much of a consultant as he is a sales leader. He's got his own podcast called Construction Conversations, which is fantastic. Just a really good conversation about, they dive into a topic with folks from the field, folks from the the contractor side, and so on. And he cut his teeth as a senior operations leader at a excuse me, one of the major GCs. So with that, Stephen, I'm gonna welcome you and say, welcome to the webinar.
Yeah, thanks you. I need to start my week off by being introduced by you. I feel like it would really give me a positive kind of start to the week each
That sound
each
that
week.
sounds like a hell of an AI agent. There you go.
That's
So
right.
we've started off, for those, if you get nothing else from today, it's the idea that you should create your own agent that introduces you on Monday morning. Well,
Yeah.
Stephen, I kind of put a lot of words in your mouth. You want to just kind of kick it off with what you've found over the past 6 months or so, as you've gone from, like I said, someone who sort of used it to someone who's now finding it almost indispensable.
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, thanks for having me, Hugh. I think I'm even wearing kind of a nice shirt for you and your audience as a little gift. But can you still hear me?
I can.
Okay. But yeah, I've had a few kind of different cycles to my career, like you mentioned. So, field ops, customer success, then kind of industry R&D on the contracting side, then kind of back into more of a go-to-market motion. And now I'm at a place where there's a number of ways in which you can scale and grow a team. And I think I was well positioned to maybe start to leverage AI because there was this confluence of I had a problem to solve, and I also had some kind of aptitude for tech. I was looking back, I had a Palm Pilot in high school. I was kind of reflecting on this as I was jotting down some notes. I can't imagine what I was actually writing down in that Palm Pilot, but I had it. And as a PM, I was pretty kind of tech enabled and tech forward. I was always open to being the one to kind of introduce and implement new technologies at the field level. But that said, I am a good representative of like the everyman case for maybe this case study. And I think when I look at kind of the first steps with AI, it started with a problem to solve, right? So I'm a sales director. I've got a team that focuses on selling BIM BDC services into the GC vertical. And around the end of last year, I kind of came to this point where I had a couple positions open on the team. I was having a hard time filling them, and my capacity. I needed to find ways to extend my capacity, and so it really started to. It started with me doing an analysis of where my time was going, and when I looked at that, it was a lot of meetings, but not just the meetings. It was the outputs and the inputs from those meetings, right? Being able to take notes within the meeting and then craft the follow-up emails, track action items. And so as I looked at where that time was going for me and my team, I started off by analyzing some of the AI transcription services that offered some value for meetings specifically. And so that was kind of the start of the journey was like, hey, help me get better at meetings. And so I looked at Otter AI and Fathom and a few other tools. And I think I settled on Otter AI, but this isn't necessarily a pitch for them. I think a lot of them do kind of similar things. But what it enabled me to do was solve the problem in front of me, which was I was able to be more present in meetings. I started recording all my meetings, so I was more present in the meetings. And then the follow-up from those meetings was much more fluid, right? I was able to take that transcription from the meeting, and I was able to even ask questions against previous meetings and then ultimately kind of build out some workflows using some GPTs that I wrote with the transcripts, the TXT files from those meetings to do a lot of things like pricing requests and proposal developments. And I think I was going through that kind of first step of that kind of AI journey when I wanted to zoom out a little bit and make sure I was maybe getting the most value out of AI that I could. And so my in-laws got me a master class membership, and there was getting the most out of generative AI, I think is the class title. And so I took that class. It's like an hour and a half, 2 hours. And that did a nice job of kind of positioning the technology in my mind, how it works, but also some of the ways that I wasn't even thinking about in terms of how to leverage both maybe the intersection between a few of these AIs, whether it be transcription AI with generative AI. And so, yeah, that was kind of the start of my journey, but I'm rambling a bit. So,
This is great. Yeah, so there's a few things I want to tease out that I think are really helpful. One of them is, yeah, you started with a need, and I think that's kind of table stakes for a lot of this. But the other thing that was really interesting is your interest in use of it was building, but then you invested, a meaningful amount of time, 2, 3 hours of time with a course. And there's two things about that. One is I give a lot of webinars, but and that's great because you become aware of things. But there's nothing like doing something. You know what I mean? Like that difference of casually listening to a webinar while you're checking your email and so on versus saying, I'm going to do a course. And Coursera has some really good ones. In fact, it may be the same guy that did the masterclass. Masterclass clearly is a good one. And if you want to learn some cooking, you can kind of twofer there. But there's enough really good stuff out there that I think it's a really good point that this idea of crossing from, kind of one level of usage to another, putting yourself into a position where you're sort of forced to think about it as opposed to just process it is really a big deal. Um, how long did it actually take? I know the thing was about an hour, but how much time did you really spend on that course?
Um, I think I tried to take it down in kind of 20, 30 minute chunks so that I could learn a little bit and then try some things and then kind of come back and not maybe consume it all at once. But you're right. I think what that also did was it exposes your brain to some new mental models. And I think increasingly we have to integrate these AI technologies into the mental models we're using to solve day-to-day problems. And I think that's the biggest thing that it did for me, right? Was it opened my eyes to what was possible and what it was capable of. Because I think even in the last maybe 6 to 8 months, there's been some big leaps that have happened, right? And so if you first interacted with ChatGPT in 2022 or something like that, and you saw some hallucinations and you saw some weird things, you might think that hey, it's for fun and not for professional use. And obviously, there's some guardrails you have to put in place, but it's really improved. And so when you're drafting content, it is at a place where it can get you, 70, 80, 90% the way there. And that in itself is going to save you quite a bit of time. So yeah, I am at that point where the course kind of gave me a good foundation to go try some things. And as you try things, you get exposed to new capabilities that then will inform how you apply that technology to the given workflows that are in your day-to-day job.
And what's a good I love the use of the word mental models, just sort of how we position things in our minds and what we think a tool is good for or not. Can you talk a little bit about how it opened up some of the mental models, like however descriptive you can get, but to just give people an idea what you mean by that?
Yeah. I mean, I think I've been blessed with a good network of folks, you included, that are kind of experts in these given verticals. And I I will frequently reach out to people to kind of add their perspective to mine as it relates to something I'm working on, whether it be a go-to-market idea or an industry challenge. And I think increasingly, if we think about our personal networks as our own personal kind of boardrooms, a seat at the table should be given to some form of AI, because we're at a point where they are good enough, um, where you can kind of assign it a persona, right? So just yesterday, I was working on a presentation for an in-person pitch, and I think I mentioned this to you. I have an idea and a vision of how I want a presentation to look, but I often don't have a graphical sense of just how you can structure different information. And so often I'll maybe Google how someone has positioned a certain variety of slide so that I can get a visual and then kind of copy that into the format I need. Um, and now I went into ChatGPT. I assigned it a persona. I said, "Hey, you're an expert at visual communication, and you've spent years communicating various business topics to large companies. I'm working on a presentation. I gave some context on the presentation. I need your help walking through how I present different information." And and it helped me do that, right? And it helped me think through the different ways that I could organize the information. It didn't give me all the information, but it helped me organize my thoughts. And so, yeah, I think that's a big one, is just opening my mind to, in addition to the human relationships I have that provide me day-to-day expertise in a lot of different kind of categories, I now have at my beck and call an expert nearly in every kind of category of life.
Love it. And this idea of thinking about AI as a board observer, maybe. But
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah.
part of your group of folks or resources to help you think things through, I think is a really good one. You just mentioned something I want to dig into a little bit. The way you described that prompt off the top of your head, and the real one may have had more detail, but already there was a lot in there. There's like three, four bullet points that really amplify the quality of what you're getting back. Did you learn that from trial and error or from that course or kind of a blend? Because it's a real big deal when you say you're this, but you're amazing, and you've done it 50 times and so on. It
Yeah.
really is a big difference in the quality that you get from the AI.
No, I definitely learned that from the course, and I forget the main teacher was he's a famous kind of professor, I think, in the AI category. It's like Ethan Mollick, maybe. I'm going off the top of my
Yeah,
head.
it sounds
Does
like
that sound
Ethan
familiar?
Malik. Who you
Um,
should definitely follow, by the way. If anyone
yeah,
is
yeah.
listening, check him out.
And so he provided some kind of tips and tricks on prompting. And the other one that I thought was interesting was you can also phrase your question that like, hey, I need this, and you can almost like add urgency to the question. And that will also improve results, which is like, hey, I need this, and if the answer to the question or the prompt needs to guarantee me that I'm going to win this job or something like that. And uh, I don't, and it's funny. He admitted that some of what he provides the tip and trick specifically in that advice, he doesn't really know why that improves the response. And so there's like this still black box element of what we're learning and what we don't know about AI, but we're kind of just like, hey, put the coins in the box and you get a toy kind of thing.
Uh, well, I do have a theory for why that's true. And it's because AI has been trained, generative AI has been trained on the whole internet. So it can pull from a lot of different sources. So by giving it a rich persona, just like you would if you were doing marketing, by giving it a really rich persona, you point it in the direction that you want. And I'll tell you one of the reasons why I'm so attracted to that idea and why I hear it when I've heard it from a couple of other places where people have just built really kind of almost to me wild prompts. Like what they put in there, you're like, really? Is if you don't do that, you often get kind of oatmeal. You get things that aren't really that insightful or aren't really that interesting. You're kind of like, yeah, thank you. As opposed to really amping it up, I find you're just getting more attitude, more insight, more directness, depending on what you're looking for. There's this wild one going around that is about being a startup advisor, and it's like, be brutally honest with me, and I'll tell you what, man, it's brutally honest. Like at one point, it said that's an immature idea to me, and I was like, literally, I was like, man, I'm 52 years old. What are you talking? Like in my
Yeah.
mind, I was thinking about that. But the point is, thinking about it and getting an AI to give you responses that are that pointed is actually really, of course, you can dial it back. But I was really impressed that by giving some thought to the almost emotional side of the prompt, you're going to get something that is more has more meat and has more insight and more edge to it, as opposed to again the kind of milk toast that you get if you just ask with one or two sentences.
Yeah. And I think along those lines, like you can use that type of prompting to get feedback in a wide variety of different kind of professional interactions. And an example of that would be, if you're walking into a meeting with a bunch of C-suite folks about a topic, hey, why not get some early indications that your outline of your meeting is going to speak to their concerns? And so, preparing a prompt that says, hey, you are a CRO, whatever that C-suite applicable title would be, and you have years in your specific industry, and you are walking into a meeting with a vendor that has this kind of product. What are your biggest concerns, or what are your biggest desires in terms of outcomes from this meeting? Like I've found a lot of value in just that kind of approach of just getting another perspective on content.
That's a really good one, and I want to flesh that out just a little bit. So there's a book called The AI Driven Leader, and he tells a story really straight out of this playbook where he'd had a really bad board meeting. And he later on goes in and says, all right, I'm going to write a persona for each of the board members. It's not a big board, it was maybe four people. Um, and each of them and put all of them into a prompt. Say, I'm about to present this to the board. Jenny is this and she's a persona, whatever, and here's what I know about her. And we're talking 3, 4 sentences each, maybe a little more, but not an enormous amount of work. And then he said, I'm going to upload a presentation. Tell me how you think each is going to react to this and what I might do to make it, a better response. And apparently he was, this is the guy who does this a lot, but it turned out to be very insightful. And to the point you're making, it's an absolutely risk-free way to get some feedback that opens up your mind. And maybe you missed something. I don't know about you, but for me, when I'm writing a presentation, very often I'm in my own head making kind of a linear argument. And you can sometimes be a little bit blinded to how what would be otherwise obvious if you were looking at your own presentation, but you weren't the one writing it. So just having a second pair of eyes without the risk of somebody reading something that's not baked all the way is enormous. And I think that speaks to your point about mindset and mental models, right? Is thinking of this thing as a partner as opposed to a search engine.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's some specific ways that you can kind of further tailor it, right? Speaking within a chat GPT context, there's things you can do with projects and GPTs that really do kind of layer in some value. And, whether it's building kind of a project around a specific set of knowledge so that you can then go back to that specific set of knowledge. I think I'm always impressed with obviously its ability to just kind of chew through content, right? So if I'm looking at a 30-page RFP, I could read that one sitting and I'm probably not going to retain as much as we would wish human brains retain, right? And so I can throw that RFP in maybe an RFP project in ChatGPT. And again, let's like for the purpose of the conversation, let's ignore the fact that OpenAI eats all of our data and steals all of our data. But like let's just, let's talk about this in terms of what's possible and let's hope for a future state that isn't like that. But you throw it into a project in ChatGPT, and then you ask questions about it. You help that inform maybe how you're going to respond to that RFP from a proposal standpoint. You can layer in information that you know about the project and have that inform again kind of the structure of your proposal. Yeah, I think I mean, you can also go down to the GPT route, which is where you can really start to customize it specific to your workflow. But are you using ChatGPT, Hugh, or are you using
Yeah. Well, I
other
actually wanted to
tools?
share screen purposely to kind of dig out some of what you're talking about. So there's two things that you mentioned, Stephen, that are really interesting. One of them is the point you just made that you can create a project which is a folder. So obviously I do a lot with specification. So this can include queries you've done. You can upload files. So it becomes a fixed place where it's not going to look beyond what you want it to look at. So if you're looking for um, you want it to assess one thing against another, it's not going to look at the whole world. It's just going to can point it at a limited amount of things, which I think is really interesting. And ChatGPT does that. So do some of the others. Google's got something similar, and I'm not so sure about Claude, but this is an example of how a lot of the value that you get from day-to-day use of AI can come from the extra little like software they surround it with. You know what I mean? And I think that's amazing. The other one that you just mentioned is GPTs, where you can train one, you can actually create one. It isn't even really training. As simple as what I just did, you can tell it what you want it to be, and then in here, give it instructions. And the cool thing here is, as you talk about what you were saying before, where you've spent time working out what's a good prompt. Well, you don't have to rewrite that every time. So you can create your own, whether it's, a presentation or a proposal assessment or something like that. So that over time you get better and better at the prompt, which is what's in here. And here you're just saying, okay, check this out. Like this prompt is really easy. You know what I mean? Like the idea that, and actually you can even say, check this presentation. Don't type it in public though. So that
Mhm.
now it's just a button that's there. And that's really interesting. So you click on the button, you don't even need to write a prompt. So those two things are really interesting tools. And the cool thing is, again, they keep making, whether it's ChatGPT or Anthropic, they keep making more and more of these little tools, whether it's search, it's deep research, and so on. So very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a
And
lot you can do there. Go ahead.
well, to that point, have you played around with deep research? This is another one that really depends on how good your prompt is. But is this something you spent some time with?
I have. Um, and I've had some good results. I mean, specifically, so I've looked at it when comparing tools. Even when I settled on Otter AI, I had it look at like, hey, look through and provide some analysis around all the different AI transcription tools out there. This is my persona. This is my use case. Do the research and then come back and tell me what you think is best. And that was really informative. And it's a fascinating thing of being able to click a button and then step away and come back to, the tool doing kind of the work for you. So yeah, I've started to also do it from an industry standpoint, kind of when I'm looking to maybe dig into deeper a topic. And, sometimes it's going to grab sources that aren't necessarily regionally specific, but again, that kind of goes back to prompting quality.
Yeah, there's a couple things I want to dig out. First of all, Wagner asked the question about big, really big files like 1,000-page project manual. So some of what Stephen's talking about here is helping you to create an answer or an insight or something like that. And it's going to be pretty good at that. Where we still have trouble is when you need it to be rigorous. So of course I'm going to talk about my company, The Link, but we use some non-AI tools in addition to AI to make sure that it's getting everything. Because right now AI is not generative AI isn't trained. It isn't the architecture isn't about catching everything. It's about the next best answer. So it's going to give you a good answer, but it often suffers when you're looking for a list. And and of course we do things like submittal logs, right? There could be 1,200 submittals in a big job. It's never going to get 1,200 of something. It's going to get 50 maybe. It just runs out of gas. So even when they say they've got what they call big context windows, that doesn't mean it's paying attention. Again, it's not really architected to catch everything. It's architected for insights. It's architected to answer a question. So that'll be your limit. And I think this comes down to what tool you're using for what thing. And a lot of what Stephen's talked about, a lot of what I've talked about is more about being a thinking partner as opposed to, doing the same thing that a database would do. It's just they're not databases, so they're not going to be as good as this. Just one other while we're here is there's a question about a Grok versus ChatGPT versus Gemini. The interesting thing is there's about 5 or 6 of them out there that are really good. I have a bias against DeepSeek because I just don't want to be. You made a passing comment about our data going where we don't want it to go for some of these. Well, I don't necessarily want that to go into something that's got a relationship with the Chinese government. But when it comes to Grok, I find it's really fast. It can be really funny too. It's got more of a personality. Like the kind of the governors that people put on some of their other tools, they don't. So it's actually kind of interesting. ChatGPT has the best tool set. So everything we just talked about in terms of what it can do in addition to just being an LLM. Gemini is amazing. Their most recent model apparently is the best. And frankly, all of the models are good enough for most of what we're going to do. Just it's all the state of the art is so good. But with the problem a little bit with Google is that they don't have everything in one place. So it can be a little bit of a pain. Like AI Studio is amazing, NL Notebook LM is amazing, but they're all in different places and they're not always so easy to connect together without doing a little bit of code. So I encourage everyone to just check them all out. And Claude, I didn't mention, Claude is often used by people that are writing a lot, whether it's literally writing or whether it's code. A lot of the developers like Claude the best. Claude Sonnet 3.7 is just amazing. So yeah, all of these tools are really great. We're focused on ChatGPT right now, just so we don't have to do a survey every time we talk. But I definitely encourage people to try different things. Sometimes, for example, writing a prompt for ChatGPT, I'll go to Grok and have it write the prompt for me and then pop it into ChatGPT because it's got more tools that the AI can use, whether it's writing, making that graphic. Literally, that photo I showed before wasn't a photo, is AI made it for me. ChatGPT made it for me. So, using the tools for what they're good at. I don't want to overcomplicate things for people, but that's worth playing with. And again, I find Grok is particularly funny, so I'm spending more time there. So hopefully that kind of helps to answer some of the other questions that kind of float out of what Stephen was asking. Stephen, are you trying some of these other tools, or do you find yourself using ChatGPT most of the time?
Yeah, I tried Claude for a little bit. I did think yeah, I think the language, all of these can kind of be trained on your tone and language. But I did find when I tried that with Claude, it seemed to be a bit more accurate. But like you said, I think I've settled on most of what I can do is present in ChatGPT, and the features are nice. I think Grok does, when I asked it about kind of more current events, I think it provides a more off the cuff answer than maybe some others.
Yeah,
But yeah, I've kind of settled on ChatGPT. I think another kind of interesting kind of layer to the conversation is it's helped me rethink the value of knowledge. And what I mean by that isn't necessarily so esoteric as it may sound, but more so like if you think about you have a meeting, there's a lot of ideas and knowledge that is traded in that meeting. if that meeting isn't saved in a capacity that can be leveraged for the future, that's just lost knowledge, right? And and so it has, and obviously there's some privacy concerns, like not everyone wants to be recorded every time they talk, and I think that's fair. But when I'm having an internal meeting and we're talking about, strategy or execution, being able to save that transcript as an artifact of that meeting and have AI produce a really nice outline of what was agreed to, action items, decision made, that is, you are increasing the quantity of knowledge that is going to be leveraged within your business. And so I think just like I think a lot of, and I maybe commented on this back in the day, but like a lot of tooling has started downstream of where knowledge is created, even though if we go to the point of origin of that knowledge, the interaction, the conversation, the phone call, the meeting, and we're able to save that, that sets us up for a different potential reality as more of these AI technologies get integrated into our businesses. And again, I think there is like some privacy concerns that we have to be sensitive to. There's all kinds of like data security, but I think just that concept, at least for me, has helped me to revalue what happens in a meeting and how I respect the kind of conversation that comes out of it and capture it in a way that can be leverageable.
I love that. One of the things that it reminds me of is when you look at a map, like Google Maps or whatever, there's a trade-off between how much detail you're seeing and how broad the topic area is, right? Like you don't see street level when you look at a city or at a state. And I think that's because our minds can only handle so much at once. And what AI allows you to do is make less of a trade-off, right? Like
Mhm.
think about 3 meetings ago. There's no way you're going back to that, even if you have a transcript, unless you're
Yeah.
paid to do it and there's something really urgent or there's some dispute. But it's not a big deal to take three, four, five transcripts from meetings, put them into a chat GPT and say, hey, what are we seeing? Like ask it questions. What is the
Mhm.
tone? What is the evolution? Have things been lost? Are we losing a lot of things? Do we seem to be covering the same thing over and over again? The sorts of questions you often ask, um, but there's no real way to answer it because you never pay a human to do. They just don't have the time or the money. But now all of a sudden, things like that, like how are we performing as a team, can be much more. I don't want to quite say quantitative, but much more evidence based than just memory. And the problem with
Yeah.
human memory is we remember the last bad meeting more than we remember the how it really went over the last five or six of them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, agree. I mean, and I think if you apply this to maybe the project level, there's some interesting ways in which you kind of rethink about how we set up project teams potentially, if we're talking from a construction context. Because I spent a number of years as a PM, and I was, my last project was 2016, so obviously things have evolved. Um, but we still have a pretty common structure, right? Project engineer, PM, super. I think in the coming kind of age of AI that we're in, if I was a PM today, I would really be thinking about how to develop a kind of a GPT centric workflow for kind of data and information flow, right? So if you're talking about how information gets out to the field, how information is captured within the trailer and how that's proliferated between the stakeholders. There's just so much that could be kind of adjusted with what we now have. Um, I would be interested to see kind of and hear from the PMs who are actually doing that because I assume there are some.
Well, it's an interesting one, and I'm going to come back to a point we made earlier that a lot of where I'm certainly seeing people use AI, and it really speaks to the point you just made is the answer going to be that someone says, I've got a PE bot? You know what I mean? Like one big agent that takes the place of some or most of what a PE might do versus, hang on a minute, I'm going to take what's there and adapt it to what we do as a company and what I do personally. And I think that back to mental models, the SaaS software mental model is I'm going to go buy one thing and it's going to be a big replacement. I think what AI we're getting to, and that's a lot of what today is about, is actually not looking for the one solution, but saying, I'm going to invest a little in myself to get good at this because I can go make the things that I want. And if I hit a wall or I run at it because it's too complex or whatever, fine, then we go look for software. But a lot of the stuff that's there, whether it's Copilot, which we haven't talked about so much, but most of these functions plus some others are in Microsoft Copilot. Um, it allows you to go and say these are the specific things that we need. I just yesterday was giving a talk to a sheet metal contractor, and their head of operations did exactly what Stephen did. He spent the time and dug in to kind of make that leap to being a little more comfortable and learning some things and some skills. He's now doing crazy things that they're not big, but they really matter to his team. An easy example is he went in and asked ChatGPT, I need to make it easier for my team to keep track of lines and entries in a timesheet of all things. So he goes, it says, well, what you should probably do is make the rows and columns highlight when you click on it so you can keep an eye on what's where. ChatGPT sends him to go and wrote Visual Basic code, told him where to put it. So he cut and pasted it, not understanding any of the code, popped it into the right place in Excel. And now he's got this automated way where his team can keep track of what columns and rows they're working on. No one would make software for that. But now, there's a team of a dozen people whose lives are a little bit better. And you multiply that times 10, 15, 20 across a year and you've got a team who's working together a little bit better and whose lives are a little bit better. I think that's the new paradigm, not let's find the next Uber agent that's going to take everything over. It's yeah, agents will do some things, and yes, SaaS software is going to do some things. But now there's the ability to do a lot of what we're talking about here, which is own it yourself and say, I'm going to make this thing do what I want. I'm going to keep asking it. Because the other thing, Stephen, you and I haven't talked about so much is, and you've hinted at it with when you don't have a good prompt, you go back in. But a lot of this is iterative, right? It isn't just getting it right. It's like that wasn't quite what I wanted. And that's a really new thing. Asking
Mm.
AI to do a better job the second time, and it never gets mad at you. You know what I
Mm.
mean? It never wonders, oh my God, what's going to happen with my career? I keep screwing up. It's just going to keep answering the question. How have you found the iterative thing in what you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's training me as much as maybe training it, right? Like I think it it does kind of show me what's not working. And then like you said, going and asking it how to maybe even communicate with it around a specific outcome that you're trying to get was another kind of aha moment. Like you don't even have to come up with the perfect prompt. Like describe the outcome, describe the variables, and use that to have it craft a prompt that is going to get you what you need. Um, but I think it has opened. I feel like every time I interact with a new kind of component that adds value to my life, there's another kind of layer of life that I expose it to. And like for example, I have an organic gardening GPT. I've wanted to get more into gardening, and I have a garden. I've killed many gardens, and so I have this little GPT that allows me to either like I can take a picture of a plant if it's starting to struggle, and it'll give me some advice around whether I'm overwatering it or maybe it needs some fertilizer. It can give me some advice on trimming back tree. Like there's as you start to interact with the world, this idea of having an expert in your pocket for any category of life is a very uniquely new concept that I think all of our brains are still adapting to. Um, but I think the big takeaway for me, in addition to some of the use cases that we've talked about, is just education, right? Like I think if you're on this call, you're most likely pretty intellectually curious and like learning. And and this opens up your world a little bit. I like to read and I try and read lots of books. Um, but even what's going on in the world, like if you're talking about tariffs with a buddy, like I believe in some Austrian economics, and so I'm able to position what I know and reinforce it with some different perspectives based on using AI just to educate me in those different categories. And so I think if we apply that to construction, think about the way in which project engineers are onboarded into a company. Often they're either thrown a large manual or they're thrown right into the task and hopefully they swim, right? And I think we're probably getting better in that way, but this really opens it up. Like there should 100% be kind of AI enabled trainers for the next generation, and it will increasingly kind of teach them in the way that they learn best, right? And do you want to learn something via video? Is it a walkthrough? So yeah, I think that the category of education I think is pretty interesting too as a use case.
That you once again talked about something I feel really strongly about. One of the issues that definitely is there, and it's a little beyond what we were going to talk about today, but I can't help myself, is we are starting to see that over reliance on AI is eroding critical thinking. And I think that that's something we're going to have to watch out for. Is someone like Stephen who's been around a little bit, and your intuition and experience is what it is. You know what I mean? Like you've already kind of gone through the early career learning. The fear now, and it's there's been some research, even Microsoft published something in January, that we're finding that people that grew up with this, especially, but really everybody, runs the risk of relying on it too much and not developing or not retaining the critical thinking that is necessary. And at the end of the day, a lot of what construction is about is making good decisions in a highly variable environment, right? Whether it's the weather or it's the subs you're working, whatever it might be, things change a lot. And that's where critical thinking is actually what you're really there for, right? And it's pretty hard to automate. So I think the idea of using AI to address some of the problems that it creates, I think is a good one because you can say the best way to learn something is to watch someone doing it and having a really good mentor. The second best way is to have material given to you in small little bits while you're actually doing something. So learning in the flow of work is the word that people sometimes use. And that is where AI can help. I think the mentorship and the kind of modeling after how somebody does what they do, that's really complex and you kind of need a human, not kind of, you absolutely need a human for that. But AI can help with some of this. And I think that whether it's even in ChatGPT, believe it or not, you can have it every day send somebody something, right? Like that's really interesting. That like every day I want you to ask a question, or much more interesting to me is look at what's on the schedule, look what they're working with, and give them information that broadens what they understand. Whether it's telling them about the business, the building code, or telling them about how the company does certain things. But it doesn't have to be taking an hour out of your day. It could be 5 minutes that you require the 20 something to do to make sure that they're learning along the way, and they're learning this stuff right as they get to apply it as opposed to in abstract. The problem with a lot of training is you sit down, you're thinking about where you're going to go tonight, what am I doing for dinner, while somebody's up in front of you telling you, taking 2 hours to train you on something. That really doesn't work. And again, AI gives us the ability to, these tools anyway, are beginning to give us the ability to correct that and address it. So yeah, I think it's really important. And I think you're going to hear more and more about that as it becomes more and more used.
Yeah. Someone's asking the question about do we have any experience using AI to automate reading standardized documents like project schedules? Um, I mean, I think there's some tooling out there, not necessarily specifically around reading schedules. I think the question back would be, what are you trying to extract from consuming that schedule? I mean, I think the problem with schedules is you have so many consumers of a schedule that oftentimes what you put into that schedule is really dependent on, the 13 different stakeholders that are going to be reading it. And so, but there's some AI enabled tooling around like Alice technologies allowing you to ingest different project schedules and output different varieties of kind of based on scenarios. Like a smart PM, it allows you to do some analysis of scheduling based on an ingested schedule. But where were you going to go with your answer? You.
A couple things. I think Stephen brings up a really good point, and that is that a generalist tool like a chatbot isn't going to be the same as actual software. So whether it's an Alice or a Smart PM or some of these other folks that have built workflows and have built UI around how people do their jobs is always going to be better than just popping something into a chatbot. But that said, you usually can upload something if it's a PDF and it can give you some insights. The things to be careful of are partly what I just said, where it isn't really built for a process. So it's only going to give you, it's going to summarize as as good as the prompt that you give it, if that makes sense. So you kind of have to be careful what you're asking it for. The other thing that might wind up being a thing is that depending on the schedule, people use a lot of shorthand, they use a lot of words that may not mean something. So you got to ask yourself, is it going to know what all this stuff means? Because it just, it assumes a human that's on the project is reading it. So they'll often use, as I say, whether it's, acronyms or whatever. So I think that you should just try it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, depending on what you want to get out of it, it might wind up being really useful, or it might, what you ask it to do might be too complicated for AI to do. Because I would also be careful if you're asking it to do too many steps in a row and be accurate and be complete, it's not the thing to do. It's not going to be good at that. There are automations out there where you can string things together, but you wind up needing to debug them. So that's a broader point I'd make is keep in mind when you're asking AI to do a chatbot to do something, it's good at the range of things it's good at. But if you're asking for too much complexity or too many steps, that's what software is for. And there's a reason why software takes so long to debug. The problem we have sometimes with AI is that it can give you a result that looks really good. And unless you dig in and check it yourself, you may not know that it missed a thing or it mischaracterized something or it got something, it got some acronym wrong. Like there's one out there that I use a lot called MCP, Model Context Protocol. Every time I've asked AI about it, like a chatbot, it's come back with Minecraft something something, like it got it wrong. And I had to actually check and make sure that it got it right. So the answer to that is I think it's worth trying. Just be careful about how much you're asking it to do. Like a general rule of thumb for AI is try to make the problem as small as possible. Um, you're going to get a better answer. If you make the problem too big, that's one of the problems sometimes with the AI hype is we imply that it's omniscient and you can throw anything at it and you're going to get good answers. Problem is you're always going to get an answer. It is architected to give you answers. Like that's the whole thing of what a transformer is, what an LLM does, but it may not give you a good one. So I think it's really important to just be conscious of the fact that it is made to give you answers, and that's where the hallucinations thing, which isn't such an issue anymore. The bigger issue is completeness and just making mistakes because of the quality and kind of structure of the document you give it to. So that was kind of a long-winded answer to say I'd give it a shot, but be really skeptical about problems that are too big or have too many steps in them. That's where, again, you're going to want software where somebody spent the time to engineer it, to do evaluations, to test it, to debug it so that it's reliable. Just doing a chatbot, you're going to have a quick answer. So things like, over the last 5 meetings, what's happened, that's perfect. Because it's giving you something you didn't know. But if you're asking it to give you things that you absolutely need to know, which is where again looking at a schedule might be, you just got to be careful about everything I just said.
I think it's also ironic that if we think about the way in which we effectively communicate with AI, the folks that are better communicators with humans are going to be better at communicating with AI. Have you found this to be true?
I think that's a really good point, and I think it speaks to a bigger point, which is you're not talking to normal software anymore. So you
Yeah.
need to get the thing you're asking it to do is cognitive, even if it's not the same as a human brain. And I hate it when people start thinking like that. But it is doing thinking, even if it's narrow or limited or whatever. And to your point, people who have empathy, where they're thinking about how they're being heard by somebody, have the tools that they need to think the same way about AI to say, this thing isn't human. It isn't a 20-year PM. So I'm going to have to give it what it needs to give me a good answer back. So that's absolutely the same. Think about
Yeah.
if you were, this is where the artificial intern thing makes sense, right? Artificial intern saying that, imagine this is someone 2 years out of college or maybe not out of college, and I hired them as an intern. So they're super smart, really good at looking things up, and have absolutely no judgment or intuition. How would I prepare that person to give me a good answer? Really like that.
Yeah, I think the other maybe thing to think through that I've found out recently is the power of kind of layering these AI technologies, right? Like using a transcription tool to record a meeting and create a text file, and then using generative AI to kind of suss out an outline. And then I just started kind of trialing Gamma.app, which helps you produce kind of almost presentation material. And you can, with those three kind of tools, you can get to a point in minutes that would have taken you hours, right? And And again, it's not going to do everything for you. It's not going to produce a final deliverable, but it's going to get you to a point in minutes that you would have taken maybe 2, 3 hours. And so just that concept alone has kind of opened my eyes to better ways to communicate to people that maybe in years past were constrained by my ability to assign time to it. And I was at a conference last week or the week before that you were at, and one of the conferences or one of the sessions from a tool of DPR was really good. And so I was able to use that transcript because I bought one of those Plod devices. So I have a hardware device that kind of sits as a magnet on the back of my phone. And I recorded the session, created an outline from the session of just kind of key takeaways and some of the key quotes, and then produced a little one pager very quickly from it that I was able to send internally to a few of my colleagues to just give them a perspective of what I learned from the session. I wouldn't have done that in the past because it would have taken me too long. And so it is kind of opening the opportunities for how we communicate with each other in maybe more visual and effective ways.
It's an interesting corollary to that. You got to listen to him instead of sitting there taking notes. So the other way you would have done
Yeah.
that is to take notes, and you're only half listening while you're writing, it's hard to listen. So you got to be fully present and listen to him and then go back to it later, which is really interesting. Again, it speaks to everyday meetings where the ability to record it, transcribe it means that you don't have to be worried about taking notes along the way unless that's part of your process, which it is for some people. Yeah, it really
Yeah.
changes how you interact with knowledge, exactly to the point you made earlier.
Yeah. Spot on.
One of the things I want to speak to that has come up, because a lot of us are we work with confidential and quasi-confidential information. When you're using ChatGPT, that look, if you don't trust their terms of service, then that's true for all cloud software. So that's a deeper issue. But there's a few things they do that can make you feel a little bit more comfortable. One of them is when you go in here, you can turn off some of the ability for it to, and if you pay for it like $20, not the big one, you can turn off its ability to share. The other one, that's if you're particularly worried about it, a temporary chat allows you to do, you can't use every tool, but you can use most of them. They won't even remember it for your own memory. So this is about as secure as any cloud software is going to be. They realized a while, like 2 years ago, that it was a real impediment to adoption if people thought that their documents were going to be used for training. Now, we've seen with OpenAI and all of them really that they're not always as purely ethical as we wish they were. But again, you could say that about any cloud software. So again, there are things that you can do that at least legally they shouldn't be doing this. Whether they're be doing illegal things, that's a deeper question. So I think that when you're looking at how to use documents that have an NDA or otherwise, you're really responsible for being careful about how it gets used. There are tools out there, and there are also ways. One of the attendees mentioned you can also host an LLM on either. You can actually do it hosted on AWS. You don't even need it locally. In fact, AWS Bedrock offers the ability to do that. So obviously, it isn't something a non-developer can do, but it isn't a really huge lift to say, I'm going to take Llama, which is the Meta model, the model from Meta, where you're taking a copy of it. It isn't going back to their servers. It's sitting on the server you're renting from AWS. So there's really no reason someone who isn't eavesdropping and essentially hacking you is ever going to see your data. And I'm seeing more and more of that. I know a couple of contractors who are looking at actually going into on-prem. So they're actually building their own servers with, top of the line and not so top of the line stuff to get around that. But in the short run, as you're playing with this, again, there's a couple of tools that OpenAI has, and some of the other folks do as well, that give you a layer of protection against concern that your data is going to show up somewhere. I think a lot of people were shocked in that there was early 2023 when you'd see like image generation and there'd be like a Getty Images logo. That's pretty striking to me. So it's less of a concern than it was. It is now at the point where if you trust cloud software, then you can probably trust this. So, it's a decision you need to make, but it's less dangerous than I think a lot of people are concerned it might be. So we're coming in for a landing, Stephen. This has absolutely been amazing. Wagner has a good question. Any tips on how to implement AI in estimation? So I'm going to take this, but by all means, jump in because I had actually had a couple conversations with subcontractors lately. There is some takeoff software. Toggle's one, Pella, I think, is another one that are not bad. They struggle a little bit with what real drawings look like. So you may find that it gets you 80 to 90% there, but a human still has to go eyeball it. They're not usually made for 3D. So when you're looking at estimating something like for drywall, it might not be so bad. In fact, it probably won't be. But like I was talking to someone in the sheet metal mechanical world, where some of what they're doing is about the machines, and it's just more complicated than the drywall might be. So I do think there's some. I wouldn't trust a chat GPT. I wouldn't even come close to trusting something like that, no matter how good your prompt is. Someone has to go in and debug the hell out of that to make it work. So again, there's some software out there. I would just Google it or go into ChatGPT and say I need help with estimating. There's some good stuff. Edify, I think, does some interesting stuff as well. So it's definitely something people are looking at. But again, I'd be really careful about using an open, like a ChatGPT or a Claude, because they're just not built for it. So you may wind up finding that it causes you more anxiety and annoyance than it saves time because of what it misses, and it might be weird in what it misses. So you may I'd be like, oh my God, it missed that. How would that be true? So anyway,
I think the other thing I would say is like I think estimating is a pretty high level category. I think what you will inevitably have as an estimator is you're probably in a lot of meetings. You're probably doing a lot of writing based on what you're learning about these projects. And so my recommendation would be like identify some of the baseline workflows that are supporting the category that is estimating and take the baby steps by using some of these out of the box tooling to make those baby steps, those little input workflows to your estimating process to make them better. And each time you do that, you will learn ways in which these available tools can kind of continue to grow in maturity to kind of meet that overall need. And then you can obviously layer in some of these point solutions specifically for that category of tooling. But yeah, I would maybe start small and see what that does for your frame of mind.
but I'm also going to say we have had right now one of the best comment sections I've ever had in a webinar. So I encourage everybody to look at this. I'm going to try when I post this on, we're about done, so we're going to close up shop in a minute. I will try to grab some of these answers and put them in when I post this on YouTube over the next couple of days. Because again, sometimes we get great stuff, and there's just been some really smart folks talking, especially about the estimating question. So I think that what Stephen and I said, obviously we stand behind, but some folks that look like they've done that particular thing a little more have some good insights. So hop through that and look at it real quick. Um, Amazing. Well, Stephen, thank you and thank you everybody for joining us. This has been a great conversation. I think I'm going to end by saying for a lot of folks are here because you obviously wanted to think about how you can use this more. My takeaway from a lot of this is definitely go take a course, do something that gets you actively learning and kind of identifying new ways, especially prompting. I find that that's a really big unlock. There's some good stuff on Coursera, Masterclass. Again, there's just so much else in Masterclass, and it's only like $200 or whatever the number is. So it's a good idea. But there's good stuff on Coursera. There's some good stuff on YouTube. Go and take the time, maybe a couple of hours, to really dig into how to prompt better. Some of my webinars, there's one in particular that's just about prompting, but it's about being active as opposed to being, just kind of listening. I think you're going to find that it really makes a difference and kind of gets you to another level. Because honestly, man, these tools are moving so fast. It's a really good idea to just keep jogging alongside. So with that,
Yeah.
thanks for being here. Stephen, any
Yeah,
closing
thanks, Hugh. That
thoughts?
was fun. No, I think that's it's a great way to end it. Thanks for having me, Hugh.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Right, see ya.